Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for. As always, I am AJ, and sitting across from me, Jason. Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing great, AJ. It's a nice morning. I walked the girls to school, got my exercise in, and having my coffee now here, ready to do a podcast. So, I don't have anything to complain about there. How about you?
You got any big plans for today?
Yeah, classes start today. Got to start teaching. So I'll be prepping some lecture material early in the day. You got to, students expect a lot these days. You got to keep it interesting. You got to keep it engaging. So I got to figure out a way to mix in some activity stuff that'll really bring the magic, as they say. So
fun stuff.
Yeah. What do you have going on?
I'm supposed to, because I don't actually, my teaching semester doesn't begin until next week. My schooling, my doctoral program starts today. So I'm going through and doing what we said in the last episode, where I'm going through the syllabus and everything, creating my checklist and everything. That's my plans for the immediate morning of today. And pretty much after lunch, and this is telling the listeners really exactly when we're recording this, because we'll be hearing about this next week. But later today, I'm just cooking and preparing for the national championship tonight.
Oh, so, yeah.
I am looking forward to that game.
Yeah, it's Eastern time. It's 8 o'clock start?
7:30.
7:30 start?
Which means I'm not going to be in bed until probably midnight.
Yeah, it's gonna last a little bit. I think the Bulldogs are gonna walk away with this one.
I hope so. But I mean, I will say, Ohio State, that game scared the ever-loving mess out of me.
Well, Ohio State outplayed Georgia pretty significantly the entire game. Yeah. It was just everything went right for Georgia at the right time. Did they use up all their luck?
Oh man, there were so many things. Like, if that didn't happen, then it wouldn't have went the way that it did. So I'll take luck involved in anything.
I don't know whether there was some karma in there. Did Ohio State do something wrong?
I'd have no idea.
You can play well and still lose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today's episode, we are going to be talking about something. So we're beginning the semester, and especially as students hear this, hopefully, they will be hearing this at this time of the semester. So today we're going to be talking about dropping, changing, or withdrawing from classes. Does that sound good to you?
Perfect. Before we do, let me remind everybody, visit us on our website. That's Reschool'd with a D, not an ED.com. Check out our most recent episodes. Drop us a line in the comment box. Also, you'll find the places where our podcast is hosted, things like that. So wherever you're getting this, there you go. Give us likes, give us love. Hey, you can even check us out on multiple platforms and like us on multiple platforms. So
give us all the likes.
As they say, vote early and vote often, right?
Hey, amen. Amen.
And of course, social media. So you can get us there too.
Yeah. Well, with the dropping, the changing, withdrawing of classes, this is a big topic a lot of times for some students when it comes to the beginning of the semester. They get into a class, they may receive the syllabus, they start looking over the syllabus. That's one of the reasons why you want to look over the syllabus early. And then probably going to go to your first class. Now, I would venture to say, and I don't know, this is not an actual statistic, I don't have a clue, but if I had to take a guess, I would say a considerable difference between professors who teach the first day and who just go over the syllabus the first day. I would say it swings more on just going over the syllabus the first day so students can get into it. Maybe they go over a little bit, but not a lot. So you kind of learn really what the course is all about, what the expectations are all about, what the professor is like. You get all these cues and these clues as to what the remainder of the semester is going to be, along with the syllabus. And then you kind of go in your head and you think, okay, is this something that is going to meet my expectations? Is this something that's going to meet my goal? And if it doesn't, or if something comes up, then you may think, should I withdraw? Or if you are at the beginning of the semester, should I drop? So with a quick question, Jason, were you a big withdrawer or dropper of classes when you're an undergrad?
To my knowledge, I have dropped only one class ever. So the answer is no. And if I ever, trying to think, so And actually, I did not drop the class. That's during the drop ad. There may have been one or two that I dropped just to get my schedule correct without ever attending the class. But anything I ever attended, I usually stuck with it, except for one. I had this crazy scenario where I signed up for a class, went almost halfway through the semester, and turns out that class would not count towards my graduation.
So it was worthless.
It was worthless. And I needed to get academic credit. And, they were like, well, you can get credit for it. It just doesn't count towards graduation. I'm like, then it doesn't count because I'm working towards a degree here. And so I looked around and found a half semester course and said, okay, well, there's another option. I guess at that point, because it was midway through the semester, I withdrew from the course, got a W. There was no issues there. And I signed up for a half semester course, which doubled my workload because you have to do an entire course. And, we were on semester system, so 16 weeks in an 8-week period. So yeah, I think that was the only time. I don't know. What about you? Have you a big drop ad guy?
I wouldn't consider myself a big withdrawer or dropper of classes. I did withdraw from classes. At the time that I was going through school in undergrad in Georgia, we had the Hope Scholarship, and the Hope Scholarship paid for so many hours of your undergrad degree. I ended up having to pay a little bit more at the end because I ran out of hope. That sounds really bad. I ran out of the Hope Scholarship. But
you lost all hope.
All hope. Yeah, I lost everything. So there were some times where I did withdraw, and I think I can count. I wouldn't say I dropped. I didn't withdraw from more than 5 classes. I don't think so. Because I stayed pretty consistent. I figured if I'm gonna go through it, I want to go through it, unless there was something major. And I think of the classes that I did withdraw, which like I said, I'm thinking back, I think I only withdrew like 4. I think 2 or 3 of them were while I was taking chemistry. Like I was going through as a chemistry major.
Which kind of begs the question, why? Like, so I didn't drop a lot. I had a good reason when I did, or I didn't withdraw. And if I did drop, it was schedule arrangement. Why? What are some of these reasons that people do drop and withdraw? Because I have students all the time come into my class, stay the first 2 weeks, and then they're gone, and they tell me, hey, I enjoyed your class, and oftentimes they, give me, it didn't work, the schedule didn't work, or there was something else better. I don't know whether they're going for easier classes or whatever. What are some of the reasons you dropped or withdrew from classes?
Well, before we get to that question, I think we do need to dive a little deeper into talking about the difference between dropping and withdrawing.
Good
because
point.
There is a difference. There's a really big difference between dropping and withdrawing. So dropping, there's a period at the beginning of the semester from the time the classes start to usually, it depends on the school. So it depends on, it could be a week out, it could be a few days out, it also depends on the semester too. It could be, if you're talking about a summer semester, it could be only a 3-day period of drop period. But you have this drop period at the beginning of every semester. And that is the point in time where you can drop the class that you've signed up for without any penalty, and you essentially get your money back because you are not taking the class. So by by dropping, you are in essence I can't say withdraw because we're going to use that later on, but you are effectively getting rid of that class with no penalty whatsoever, no financial penalty, no grade penalty, no nothing. Okay, that's the withdrawing. It happens at the beginning of the semester, and it's usually fairly quickly. Like I said, it's about, on a normal semester, it's probably about a week to maybe a week and a half if you're lucky. Okay, withdrawing is also, there's a period which happens after the drop period. So the day after the drop period ends is when the withdrawal period begins, until typically sometime after midterms, because this is the point in time where you want to see where your grades are going. In that period, you can what's called withdraw from the class. So you are effectively stepping away from the class, but you do have a penalty. The penalty is you've already paid for the class. You're not getting that back. But it's going to go on your degree. It's going to go on your transcript as a W. It's not a fail. It's not a pass. It's just a W. You started it. You didn't finish it for one reason or another, but it has no effect on your GPA whatsoever.
Is there
you,
any repercussions though? Like, so you got a W on your transcript. Is there anything negative that can come from that?
From the perspective of your GPA, I don't think so. From the perspective of finance, and especially like financial aid, yeah, because again, for me, I had Hope Scholarship, and it only paid for a finite amount of hours. So when I did withdraw from a class, that money was already spent. So which means I still had to take a class at the end. So I had to pay for that because I wasn't being paid for that class. I've already paid for that class essentially.
Gotcha. So withdrawal, you've paid for it already. That's come out of pocket or whatever funding you have type scenario. If you're not getting that back, there's no, it's basically wasted money.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, and I can guess you can attest to this too. Like, we don't know, we're not trained really almost at all when it comes to financial aid. We know the bare basics, which is what most of the students knows. That's about all we know. There are professionals within the university and the colleges that are trained heavily on financial aid and the regulations and all that kind of goes with it. I don't know if there is a repercussion for withdrawals and too many withdrawals and being on financial aid. I can only speak from the scholarship side, like the Hope Scholarship in Georgia. But I would imagine that there's probably going to be some repercussions from a financial aid perspective too. I just don't know what that is.
Well, it can change your status too, right? So you withdraw from a class, all of a sudden you don't have the minimum hours to be considered a full-time student. And I know that changes something about your entitlement to aid, right?
Same thing for athletes too. Like if you have to have so many hours attempted in a semester in order to be eligible to play in the next semester or in the past 12 months. You have to have so many hours attempted in order to be eligible to play. So you have to consider that as well when you're withdrawing is if you're an athlete and you're right on that fringe, you may not be able to have the flexibility to withdraw.
That makes sense.
And to take it one step further, after withdrawal period ends, you can still withdraw. However, you get what's considered, typically it goes on your transcript as a WF, which means you withdrew after the period, which still means you got an F. But you didn't get an F because your grades were an F. You got an F because you withdrew from the class. Still counts as a 0.0 on your GPA calculation. Still goes down as an F. Anybody that looks at your transcript will see that. It doesn't really... There are very, very few situations where I would say that's probably a good move. And we can get into that as well. But that's the difference between dropping and then withdrawing after the period. We also threw in here changing because sometimes we do change classes and more specifically change professors. So you're taking the same class, but you're moving from one section of the class to the next section of the class because there's a different teacher. That's somewhat common too. So we're going to talk about that. So now that we get... Oh, go ahead. You go question?
Yeah. Don't a lot of colleges... so the whole WF thing... well, I know that's just basically a classification as to whether somebody continued on. And I think that is used for determination of registration status, whether you continue to be a student in the school and then financial aid reasons and stuff like that. So, but how do you... So I've had a lot of students drop. I've had a lot of students withdraw at different times for various reasons. And I've had a lot of students just fail, get Fs or WF or whatever. In many colleges these days, students can retake the same course and replace their grade. That was something that never happened for us when I was in school. You could not keep your grade average up by retaking a course. All that did was, well, you took it again, you failed it, then they average, you make an F, you make an A, then it averages out to probably be a C, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I'm just curious. I want to hear your pure opinion personally. On
I was in the same boat. When I was going through, and I think a lot of colleges are this way. I'm sure it's a state by state thing, so it's depending on the state. But when I was going through, if you failed a class and you retook the class, then you had to essentially the F went into your GPA, and the A, if you took it again and made it A, went into your GPA. So it didn't cover it up. It just made it go up a little bit by the average. So again, if you had an F and then you made an A again, you would average it out to a C. So that's what was going on your GPA.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that happened is if somebody wanted to look at your transcript, if you send in your transcript for a job, the highest grade would be put on there. So if you've ever looked at your transcript, you know that you have all of the courses that you've taken that goes into your degree, and it tells them what the grade is and everything. And usually at the bottom it says like courses not used. And these are all the courses that didn't fill into your go into your transcript or your degree, the ones that you failed and the ones that you withdrew from with a W, whatever. These are the ones that does not go into your degree, but they do go into your GPA. So from a transcripts perspective, your employer, if they were looking at it from the face of it, they would see like the A. The GPA would still have the average of it, but if they went down, they would see the F as well. So they would see kind of both sides of it. Mm-hmm. So now back to your question of how do I feel about that, about it actually just completely replacing it. I think it's, and this is me being maybe being controversial. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it because, you know, a person who takes a class, gets an F, and then takes the exact same class with all the same resources and gets an A, to me is not on the same line as somebody who takes the course one time, busts their hump to get an A in that class the first time and can leave with an A. They're not on the same level to me.
I'm with you on that. I mean, it looks the same record-wise if you do the replacement, but it's almost like giving double the time for the same assignments. Yeah. It's because, you know, many of the assignments aren't going to change from semester to semester, and it meant you got an early heads up. You actually got to start on it. You might have even gotten feedback on it from the prior semester, and now you have a leg up going into everything. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but you know, once again, it just begs that question: what does completing a college degree or completing a class say about you? Does it say you know the stuff or mastered the material, or does it say you were diligent and made it through doing things you didn't like? Well, if that's part of it, if you take it as, okay, you took a bunch of classes you didn't like, or yeah, you might have forgotten 80% of it, as the statistics say, right? That you're not going to remember everything, but you did the work, you made it through it. That says something about you. But then you're hiding the fact that you actually didn't go through and complete it the way everyone else did. You took a lot longer time, and I don't know, there should be some like asterisks there, right? It's like putting and somebody in the Hall of Fame, you know, after using steroids, that asterisk by their name with a record, you know, just like that, there should be an asterisk there saying that, oh, this person took this class 4 times before they finally passed it, and they professor shopped around until they found the professor that nobody could fail, right?
Yeah, and I do think too, there are like context is everything, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. You know, the context behind, you know, why you should drop or consider dropping or withdrawing versus not. I do think when you're in a job seeking position, so you're going through interviews and you send in your resume, you send in your transcripts or whatever, I do think there are context clues that could help with that. You know, if you look at somebody that has a 4.0, but it took them 6 years to go through college, I would want some kind of explanation. Now, granted, that explanation could be you didn't take many classes because you had to work full time because you had a family. Cool, that's fine. But that comes with the context. So when you interview, that would probably be something that would be asked. That's fine. But if like you're saying, okay, I spent 6 years and I failed half my classes and had to retake them, but after I retook them, I got a 4.0, there's your context. There's that asterisk. So
you remember the movie Tommy Boy?
Oh yeah,
with David Spade and
I love that movie. Chris Farley.
Chris Farley. It was amazing, but I just remember the scene. It's like lots of people go to college for 6 years. It's like they're called doctors.
Doctors, yeah. Yeah, I love that movie. It's a great movie.
That was a classic. But yeah, there should be some kind of explanation there. Why you know it took you 6 years to get 120 hours worth of credit, which most colleges somewhere around in there is the bare minimum to graduate. Yep. What were you only taking? Were you working part time? Were you only taking 6 hours a semester? Like, nope.
I just failed everything the first time.
Twice. Yeah. Give it the old college try one time, and then use those results to get up to an A the next time.
Oh yeah. Well, let's get back to your original question. Okay, so that is, when should you consider dropping or withdrawing a class? So let's start with the dropping. So beginning of the
Okay.
semester, you get your syllabus, you go to first class, you listen to the professor. What are some reasons or some rationales that could be used to consider dropping from that class? So no penalty, money back, all that kind of stuff.
Well, for me, it was just schedule.
Yep.
If there were a class that fit better in my schedule in terms of what I needed to accomplish, right? You have to get academic credit for certain classes. It fits better that I'm taking, uh, you know, uh, calculus this semester rather than my history class. And section time opened up where that would work, and I had to have it. Well, history I could take that anytime. Calculus, this might be the only semester I could, you know, fit it in as a prerequisite and things like that. So I'm like, okay, sheer necessity, schedule requires it for me to graduate, from it to work out. I dropped the class to make my schedule work. Which, by the way, that sounds easy, but you really have to do some projection, some
Yeah.
foresight as to, oh, okay, you got this semester and then this semester and then this semester. What am I going to take next semester? What are the prerequisites for it? Oh crap, I can't take these two classes at the same time. If I can't, is that going to set me back in my degree progression? All of these things. So if you're not doing that mental math, you're not going to be prepared to, you know, accommodate, the requirements of your degree. So there you go.
For
So
the
number
for the
one,
love
schedule.
for the love of all things holy in this world, you
Mhm.
hit on the number one thing that I think should be said to every incoming freshman, or really anybody, but incoming freshman into college, and that is, you have to plan out the semesters. The worst thing, most universities, they give you this curriculum of all the classes that you have to take, and it's usually broken up into sections or areas. So these are all your core classes, and these are this, and this is your major classes. This is your elective class. These are what you. But they put it in a form that gives the illusion that this is the order that it has to go in. And so
Mhm.
you start from the top and you work your way down, and then you work your day. If it's two columns, you work your way down on the other side. That is not the case.
Mm-mm.
You have to go through and understand prereqs, understand when certain classes are going to be taken, when to take, do it out of order. Now, granted, your first semester, you're going to have some pretty straightforward classes that you have to take because they're the prereq to all prereqs. But after that, I mean, you really need to project this thing out. So to me, that is the number one tip I can give you about starting college, period.
How many students have you seen? And for me, it's been a lot, I can tell you, that messed up by
Oh,
dropping a class because the following semester they didn't have the prerequisites. And basically, they had almost no options in terms of what to take. There was like one set of course sequence and it didn't matter if it was favorable or not. This was what they had to take next semester.
I just had a student I met with not too long ago that, this person came in and said, here are the classes I want to take. And this is kind of early on in the college career. I would say, probably the third semester. So first semester of the sophomore year, maybe the fourth. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But they were like, oh, here's the classes I want to take. And I was like, okay, so why do you want to take those? And they go, well, it seems like a pretty easy course load, blah, 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 blah. And as I was going through it, I was noticing like, okay, I can see this working. But then I started looking at the prereqs, and it would have thrown their entire graduation off by a full year because of the way that the prereqs work, where you couldn't take this class until you took this class, but you can't take the next class until you take that previous class. And it would have thrown off mightily because there is a certain point, and I've had this, quite often too, to where you have a student sitting in front of you and they're like, okay, what classes can I take? And I'm like, well, you have to take this one because it's a prereq to the next one. And they're like, well, I want to take 5 classes. And I'm like, you can't. It is impossible for you to take 5 classes. You can only take 4 because you're missing a prereq to that 5th one.
You have boxed yourself into
Yeah.
a corner to where, if you take a class, it's going to be something that's not going to count towards your current major. Maybe you should pick up a minor.
Yeah. I mean, that sucks. I mean, to have to tell a student that, like, and potentially, depending on how severe it is, to tell somebody, well, you thought you were going to graduate in the spring, now you're going to have to graduate in the fall, assuming you don't take summer.
Students don't realize that either. If you drop a semester where you don't, get 15 credit hours, which, is kind of the average there for most students who are going to do this in 8 semesters. If you have a 12-hour semester or even drop further, 9 hours, something like that, the odds of you graduating on time just went down severely, because if you're not planning on taking summer courses, or if you don't have a semester that's going to be so light that you can pack an extra 1 or 2 courses into it, which, by the way, in most majors, that is not the case.
Yep.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of majors where you can take 18 credit hours and be fine. But there are a lot of them that you cannot. Like, can you do that in science?
Yeah, no,
No.
there's no way.
It would crush you. I mean, and don't get me wrong, every degree is different. I mean, I've received quite a few degrees, and I started down the science track, so I feel like I have a good understanding of that as well.
Did I.
Science and math is so much more demanding than some of the other majors that's not an option. Now, yes, if you're, underwater basket weaving, I think
You could probably pack that in pretty well.
You could probably pack a couple extra of those in, and you'd be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one who hates on people for the difficulty of the degree of study that they chose, right? Now, I do ask a few questions when they want to go into an area and they chose the easiest course of action. Like, if you want to go to medical school and you've majored in something other than like biology or chemistry or, something that gave you all of those classes, well, it begs the question, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're just taking the minimum requisite classes rather than really developing your knowledge set to prepare for this. It's probably not the best course of action, right? But yeah.
So my consideration for dropping, I would say when it comes to dropping, so again, we're talking about the beginning of the semester where there's no repercussions really, outside of what you were just talking about, where it could prolong if you're not careful. I would say those considerations are a lot more flexible. You can come up with some, whatever rationale that you need to, because there's no repercussions outside of the prolonging. So if you're good with that, then if you go to a class and you go, this is a really, really tough class, and I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to actually commit to it, then drop, because it's not going to affect you. Financially, it's not going to affect your GPA. The only thing it's going to affect is your prolonging. Withdrawing is a little different, because your consideration for withdrawing needs to be very, very limited, because you do have that repercussion. I mean, you paid this money. Somebody paid this money, whether it be scholarship or, your student loans or you just paying it outright. Those are a little bit more, like I said, very limited. To me, when it comes to withdrawing, the one that comes to my mind is it depends on what your major is, and it depends on what your goals are. If you're somebody who wants to go to medical school, you're going to need a good GPA.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're starting to really get down in a class and don't know if you can pull that up to what you need, then it might be something to consider about withdrawing, because you've paid the money, but your GPA at that moment becomes more important. Same thing, if you want to go to a master's program, you're going to need a somewhat high GPA. So that would be worth, withdrawing. If your plan is to get an undergrad, get a bachelor's degree, and that's it, and go right into the workforce, then, like I said, it becomes a lot more limited. Like, why would I've already paid for it. I might as well, essentially you've gone through half the class, probably a little bit more than half the class, depending on what college you go to and what their rules are for withdrawing. You've already gone through a large portion of the class. You already know you're going to have to retake this class. You might as well get as much information as you can when you have to retake it. You might as well know what the next tests, if there's 2 more tests to go, you might as well need to know what they look like, or at least the format they're going to be in, what information you need. And I always tell my students, especially with, certain professors too, you never know what's going to happen until the end.
Oh yeah. There could be extra credit. There could be drop things. You could blow it out of the water on the final exam. I mean, you never know about these things.
I had actually had a graduate professor, and I was struggling in the class. Now, master's program's a little different because you do have to maintain a certain GPA, and you have to, you can't fail so many classes. And I was not doing really well in that class. I think I had a C in that class at the time, and it was a fairly low C. So I guess you would say almost borderline D. And we had like 3 tests and a cumulative final. And I spoke to the professor, and we were going into our cumulative final, and I was like, I'm a little worried about my grade. I'm pretty sure I can do what I need to on the final, the cumulative final, because now I understand it, especially in accounting. Accounting is one of those things that it has to click. Once it clicks, it starts to make sense, and everything gets easier. Hadn't clicked for me yet until that moment. And end of the semester, we go to the last chapter, and they bring everything full circle. I'm like, now it starts to make sense. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, is there anything I can do to help me? And the professor told me probably the best explanation, and I actually used this in my class when I first started teaching, is the final was cumulative. And the professor said, the reason I have a cumulative final is because it tests you on everything we discussed in the whole semester. So that if you just had a brain fart at the beginning of the semester and you just completely bombed the first exam, perhaps you bombed the second exam, I don't know. But you get to the final exam, which is cumulative, and you make an 80, a B. You're essentially saying that you understand 80, 85%, whatever your grade is, percent of everything that we discussed in the semester. So it gives me reason, it gives me a rationale, an argument as to say, well, if you understand 85% of the cumulative final, then I can rationalize to say you understand 85% of the semester. That doesn't mean you get a B, but if you were unable to make it to a C, it gives me the ability to say, but they still deserve to pass. And I was like, okay, cool. It brings a lot of stress off of me, and it gives me that outlet I need. So yeah, you never know what's going to happen until the end. I've had classes where, my biology class, everybody said, you're going to make an F. If you make an F, he's going to bump you up to a C. And I thought, okay, this is a risk, but I'm going to go with it. And sure enough, I did not pass that class, but I got a C.
So I've never had that in a class, but I've heard it so many times that professors grade on the, they don't institute
curve.
Any sort of curve, and the class is so difficult, like a high level mathematics or chemistry or something like that. And everybody in the class the highest average is like a 70, right? Just because it's that difficult. And then he or she adjusts the grade distribution, and it brings everybody up. Of course, teaching in business, we don't do that because this stuff's just not hard enough. Somebody's going to make an A in there, and you can't, give them 120 average. So anyway, so I've never done that, never had that or anything. But you never know. Of course, now, I've thought about that before. Grading without any level of curve, without any. And putting the harder questions on the test just so that students are exposed to it and things like that, and seeing the very low grade distribution. I think the first semester I ever taught, my average in the class was like 40 or 50%.
Pretty common in accounting.
Yeah, it was just terrible. And, I realized that I was making the test way too difficult for them, which honestly, at that point in time, I just believe that should be the standard, and probably should be the standard. I was just making it,
I agree. I agree with you.
But if you do that, students will be so disgruntled. Like lots of students will give up. Lots of them will complain about you to the administration, which, some administrations are more protective of you than others. And all of these things come back as repercussions. So it's almost like if you don't make it so that most of the students feel comfortable with what they're getting the whole time through, even if it's not meeting this objective standard for society, how much you should know, it's meeting the standard for how many people are in that classroom, then it's an overall negative. I don't know. Maybe that's a rant we should go on. Maybe we should have an episode about, how has education changed?
Yeah, that would be a good one. Maybe that'll be the next one. I need to write that down.
Yeah, there you go. Write that down. That I'll be our user or listener comment. That'll be our next show.
All right. So we talked about when you should consider dropping, withdrawing, and like I said, especially with dropping, I was a little bit more flexible. With dropping, I was much more limited with withdrawing. When should you not consider let's just call it withdrawing, because like I said, dropping, there's a lot of rationale you can put in that. But when should you not consider withdrawing from a class?
When it's going to hurt you, period. And you're going to have to do the math on that because not everybody will. Sometimes you may be able to go to your academic counselor and things like that. They'll say, okay, this is the course sequence you have to take, or you may be able to go to financial aid and say, yes, if you drop this course, you're definitely going to lose financial aid because of A, B, and C. Or if dropping the course results in an F and it's going to hurt your GPA, it might cause you scholarship issues, at least for a quarter or a semester, that type of thing. Any of those scenarios, if it is going to hurt you, do not drop that class. See it out through the end. The result might be the same. You might fail the class, but if there is potential to turn it around, right? I'm all about college is such a finite period of time, and everything works on these short segments, whether you're on summer semester, quarter semester, whatever. That is a very, very small period in your life. Messing that period up sets you back that amount of time in life, sometimes more. So yeah, just if it's going to hurt you, try to see it through. Try to figure out a way to get through it. Kind of like you were just talking about, AJ, right?
Yeah. That's a big one for me. Like a lot of decisions, and I think we had a episode about this a while back. Every decision we make could have a potential to come up later in life. It may give you a story. It may give you some support. It may give you evidence to a question, an interview question. It gives you opportunity. That was the episode we were talking about, was opportunities. And in these situations, these are really, talk about a class that, okay, I was taking a class. I was a D. I had a D at midterm. But I managed to pull back and get it to an A. If you can make it to an A, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you go into a job interview and they go, okay, tell me a time that was probably the most challenging, or a challenging time you had in your life, and how you overcome it. Well, there's your answer right there. That is your answer. I was taking a class. I was struggling with a class, got a D at midterm. You can see it on my transcript. I had an A in it. And here's how I did that. Here's the steps that I did. Here's the changes that I made in my life. That's a perfect answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ask for a better one. You showed perseverance. You showed grit. You showed determination. You showed all these soft skill qualities that employers are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one to me. Not considering when you should not consider withdrawing. If it's to make something easier.
Mm-hmm.
You need the challenge. You want. This is the funny thing to me, is because you talk to a lot of students and like, well, this is the easy A, or this is this is what's going to be easy for me, and all I can think of is like, if I was a student, which I am now, and we're going through this, and we have these same conversations as our cohort too. We look at some of these things and we're like, that was really, really easy. Granted, It was easy for us. We didn't have to put a lot of time into it. But you don't, as a student, as a paying student, you don't want it to be easy, because it degrades the value of the degree.
Yeah.
And so you want it to be challenging. You want it to be, somewhat hardworking. You don't want it to be unreasonable, but you don't want it to be an easy A.
Well, I will say this, and we've talked about this before. Some people are in classes that they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
They're in college and don't want to be, but they know they need it.
Yep.
And that necessity, they're just checking the box. And if there is a easy course in something that's not going to be fundamental to what they do for the rest of their lives, and it's really not going to make a huge difference, sure, take the easier course, right? That's a logical, particularly if you're going to invest the saved time and effort into what you really want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got passion, you've got drive, you've got motivation. You just need time to direct it there. That's honestly always been kind of how I structured things myself. There were so many courses I took that I didn't care really anything about, and I wanted it to be as easy as possible. I still wanted to get an A in it just to keep up that GPA and all the other stuff, but I had these things that I knew I wanted to learn, and that's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to put a massive amount in those courses. Probably could have put a third the effort in there and still gotten an A, but I really just wanted to get everything out of it. And that's when you start to grow. I see it in my students all the time where they'll put in effort that is so far beyond what I require or need from them to give them a high grade or passing grade, an A. But it's exceptional because you can see how much they grew and they just showed off their ability. And honestly, they have work product to prove their ability in the future. So yeah, as you always say, you got to be strategic about it, right?
Yeah,
So
I agree. And you brought up a really good point. And this is actually, I'll end this conversation with withdrawing on this one. But, I have a lot of students at the end of the semester, they go, should I withdraw? I'm sure you've had students ask you, should you withdraw? Also, if it gets really down to the end of the semester, so the withdrawal period has ended. So if they withdraw, it's a WF, so they're going to fail. And they get to the final exam and they're like, is there really a point for me to take the final exam? Or should I just go with a WF? And I always give them the same advice. One, I always say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not telling you what you should do. That's a calculation that you have to do on your own. But here's what I will tell you. Here's my advice to you. And that is, look at everything else. If you're in this class, so let's say you're taking 5 classes and you're failing this class. And then there's another class that you're on like this borderline D or C. Your borderline D could be a C if you put a little bit more effort maybe on the final. If that's the case, then yeah, take the time. If you're going to fail this class no matter what, take that extra time that you're saving from this, if you withdraw, and put it to the other one to make sure you pass that one. Mm-hmm. That's a great reallocation of a constrained resource, which is your time. On the other side, if you're taking 4 easy A classes and you got A's in every one of them, and then you're going to fail this one, why not? Just see it through. You never know. Like I said, you never know. A D, even though it's failing for most classes, a D is still better than an F. A D is still worth 1 point. Mm-hmm. So it's going to help your GPA. See if you can make it to a D. I've had situations where, professors, we use a lot of intangibles when we deal with grading too. I've had students in the past where the student was just not clicking for them. And I worked with this student, worked with him, multiple days outside of class, pretty much every week we met, and it just wasn't clicking. And then also some other factors came into play, and which this person told me at the end. But they failed the class, but they were close to a D. And I thought, okay, this person gave me so much work and so much effort, and then some just unfortunate event happened at the end where they couldn't put enough time into it, but they clearly showed me they put enough time because we met outside of class. I think the person should at least deserve a D. And so I bumped them up to a D. At least it gave them that extra point on their GPA. So, like I said, you never know what's going to happen until the end. One last question, and we'll make this one really quick. Mm-hmm. We talked about dropping. We talked about withdrawing. When should a student consider just changing classes? And by that, we mean changing like professors. Same class, just a different section with a different professor.
If the professor is terrible.
Yeah, that was my question. That was my answer.
There are terrible professors. I've known quite a few of them. Usually it's because there are some professors who are bad because they don't care. Mm-hmm. But they're not terrible. They're just, you're not getting everything out of it. Some professors are just utterly incapable of delivering content, organizing a course in a way that maximizes the learning potential and ability for students. They're disorganized. They don't give good assignments. They are... I see a lot of professors who are very flighty. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily realize how disorganized they are, and that leads to a negative experience. And so if you can identify those professors early and get out of that situation, do it, right?
You have a small percentage of I say small percentage that I feel can't teach. And granted, they are very smart. They may be excellent researchers. They just can't teach. And there's a small percentage of those. There are, I think, a larger percentage of professors that students take, that you have the choice to take, that they're not bad as a professor, as a teacher, as an educator. They just may be bad for you. You know, when it comes to teaching, it's how the professor, to me, it's the personality of the professor, how they conduct their class. It's how they jive with what I need when it comes to motivation, internal and external, those kind of things. And I can look back multiple times and say, this is a terrible teacher. I can look back and say, you know, they weren't a bad teacher. They weren't bad because obviously they helped a lot of students and they did help me. It just wasn't the best for me. So they were just a bad fit for me. And I think that's where a lot of students are going to come to, is they're going to, and hopefully if you're mature enough to say, this is not a bad teacher. It's just this style doesn't fit for me. Mm-hmm. That's something that I think would be worth changing in class. Obviously, if you just get a bad overall teacher, but the understanding that, you know, not everybody jives with everybody. I've had professors that students just absolutely loved, raved about, and something didn't click with me and my personality. And then I also had professors that students just absolutely hated. And I'm like, this was great. I loved it. Mm-hmm. I actually learned something from it because it was different. And so just understand what you need. And if the professor, again, this is within the first week or so of the semester, because you would change before the drop. You're essentially dropping one to add another. That's something to consider. So, mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's been a way longer episode than I was anticipating. I hope you got something out of this. You got any parting words before we head out?
Just remind everybody, we want to talk about what you care about. So hit us up on the website. Let us know what you're interested in. Obviously, check out our most recent stuff. And then again, like I say, give us those likes on your favorite social media, your favorite podcasting platform, because that's going to help us raise in the rankings.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you enjoyed the show. We hope to see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.